They believed Scotland died with William Wallace. They believed that when they tore his body apart in London, they had destroyed the spirit of a nation. But I remember those days. I remember the smoke rising from burning villages. I remember mothers crying over sons who never returned from war. The English thought fear would break us, but they were wrong, because men die. Yet legends become something far more dangerous. They become hope. And after Wallace fell, Scotland did not surrender. No, that was only the beginning. What came next was darker, bloodier, and even more brutal. A new king would rise. Clans would betray one another. Brothers would turn into enemies. And the fields of Scotland would drown once more in blood. So come closer and listen carefully, because this is the story they never truly told. This is Braveheart Part 2. The execution of William Wallace was supposed to end the rebellion. The English king wanted the entire world to witness it. He wanted Scotland to watch their greatest warrior broken in chains. He wanted fear to spread through every village, every castle, every mountain. William Wallace was dragged through the streets like an animal, his face covered in blood, yet his eyes still burned with defiance. The English offered him mercy. They told him he could end the pain if he only did one thing: kneel, acknowledge England as his master. But Wallace refused, even at the edge of death. He would not surrender. He gathered what little strength remained inside him. Then he screamed a single word so powerful that centuries later, the world would still remember it: freedom. The crowd fell silent. But in Scotland, that cry became immortal. Because in that moment, William Wallace stopped being just a man. He became a symbol. Deep beneath the grief, another emotion was growing: rage. For years they had endured English rule, taxed by foreign lords and controlled by foreign soldiers. But Wallace had shown them that England could bleed. Once that idea entered the hearts of the people, it could never fully disappear. King Edward I became even more ruthless. He ordered more executions, more terror. Homes were burned. Families disappeared. Public hangings became common. But there was one man who could not escape the ghost of William Wallace. His name was Robert the Bruce. Robert was born into nobility. He understood politics. But unlike Wallace, Robert hesitated. He feared the overwhelming power of England. He remembered Wallace's courage. He remembered the fire in the eyes of the people. And deep down, Robert knew something terrible. If men like Wallace were willing to die for Scotland, then what excuse did he have to remain afraid? The struggle became a war between Scots themselves. Clans turned against one another. Trust vanished. Betrayal became common. In the middle of this chaos, Robert the Bruce realized he could no longer stand between both sides. He had to choose, once and for all. In 1306, Robert met with a powerful rival named John Comyn inside a church. Comyn was another Scottish noble with claims to the throne. The meeting quickly turned violent. No one knows exactly what was said. Some say Comyn betrayed Robert to the English. Others say the argument simply exploded into rage. But what is known is that Robert stabbed Comyn inside the church. Blood covered the holy floor. The moment shocked Scotland. Murder inside a church was considered a terrible sin. But there was no turning back now. Robert had crossed a line that could never be undone. Days later, he made the boldest decision. He crowned himself King of Scots. The ceremony was simple and rushed because danger surrounded them everywhere. But when the crown touched Robert's head, he became the enemy of the most powerful king in Britain. King Edward I was furious. He viewed Robert as a traitor who must be crushed immediately. And so the war began once more. But Robert's early campaign was a disaster. His forces were small and divided. Many nobles refused to support him. English armies hunted him relentlessly. He lost battle after battle. His brothers were captured and executed. His allies were killed. His wife and daughter were imprisoned. One by one, Everything around him collapsed. Robert slept in forests like a fugitive. There were days when he had almost no food. Some of his own men abandoned him. Many believed Scotland's cause was finished forever. And perhaps the darkest moment of all came when Robert hid alone in a cave. The rain poured outside. The cold winds echoed through the rocks. And there, in the darkness, Robert watched a tiny spider trying to spin a web. The spider climbed and fell, climbed again and failed. Once, twice, 6 times it failed. But the spider kept trying, until finally, on the 7th attempt, it succeeded. And in that quiet moment, something changed inside Robert. He realized that defeat was not death. True defeat only came when a man stopped fighting. So Robert emerged from hiding with a new strategy. He knew he could never defeat England in open warfare. Not yet. The English army was larger, better equipped, better trained. So instead of fighting like kings, Robert fought like ghosts. He launched sudden attacks under darkness. Small groups of warriors would strike English outposts, then disappear into the highlands. Castles were attacked unexpectedly. Supply lines were destroyed. Messengers vanished in the night. The land itself became Scotland's greatest weapon. Dense forests hid rebels. Mountains blocked English movement. Swamps trapped heavy cavalry. The English soldiers grew exhausted. They never knew where the next attack would come from. And slowly, Robert began reclaiming Scotland. Castle after castle fell back into Scottish hands. The people started believing again. Stories spread across villages that Scotland still lived. And as hope returned, more men joined Robert's army. Farmers, blacksmiths, shepherds, all united under one dream: freedom. But England was not finished. King Edward I prepared for another massive invasion. He wanted one final crushing victory. But fate intervened. Before the campaign could fully begin, the old king died. His death shocked England. Edward I had ruled through fear for decades. Now his son Edward II inherited the throne. But Edward II was very different. He lacked his father's strength. He lacked discipline. And Robert the Bruce recognized this weakness immediately. Then came the year 1314, and with it, the battle that would decide everything: Bannockburn. The English army marched north with enormous confidence. Thousands of armored knights, banners stretching across the horizon. Robert's army was smaller, but unlike the English, they were fighting for their homeland. Every man knew what defeat meant. Before the battle even began, an English knight named Henry de Bohun spotted Robert riding a small horse. The knight lowered his lance and charged directly toward the Scottish king. It was a deadly attack. The crowd watched in horror. But at the final second, Robert moved aside with incredible precision. Then, with one massive swing of his axe, he crushed de Bohun's skull. The English were stunned. The Scots erupted with emotion. Their king had faced one of England's finest knights alone and won. The Battle of Bannockburn exploded into chaos. Spears collided, horses screamed, mud swallowed soldiers. Arrows darkened the sky, but the Scots held formation. They fought together like a wall of steel. The terrain worked against the English. Panic spread, and slowly the impossible happened. The English lines began collapsing. The mighty English army broke apart, and Scotland achieved one of the greatest victories in its history. Bannockburn changed everything. It transformed Robert the Bruce from rebel into legend. It proved Scotland could defeat England. And while Robert rebuilt Scotland, the legend of William Wallace continued growing across the land. He became the spirit of resistance itself. That was the spirit driving Scotland now. Not fear, not even anger, but sacrifice. The belief that suffering today could create freedom tomorrow. Because men fighting for money can retreat. Men fighting for power can surrender. But men fighting for freedom can become unstoppable. As years passed, Robert the Bruce's health slowly declined. The constant warfare, the stress, the years spent hiding in forests and riding across battlefields had weakened him. Some historians believe he suffered from a painful illness that slowly consumed his body. Yet even as his strength faded, his determination did not. He continued leading campaigns. He continued defending Scotland. He continued carrying the burden of a nation upon his shoulders. And during those later years, Robert became increasingly haunted by thoughts of death. He knew he would not live forever. He knew Scotland's future remained uncertain. If England attacked again after his death, would everything collapse? Would all their sacrifices be wasted? These fears followed him constantly. So Robert began preparing Scotland for a future beyond himself. He strengthened succession plans. He secured alliances. He tried to ensure the kingdom could survive without him. But deep inside, he also carried another burden: regret. Because no matter how much glory he achieved, William Wallace's shadow remained. Robert knew many still viewed Wallace as the purest hero of Scotland, a man who fought not for a crown, but purely for freedom. And perhaps Robert wondered whether he himself would ever be remembered the same way. Then came one of the most emotional moments in Scottish legend. As Robert lay dying, he reportedly made a final request. He asked for his heart to be removed after his death and carried into battle against Scotland's enemies. Some say he believed his body had grown too weak to continue fighting, but his heart still could. It was a symbolic gesture, yet powerful beyond words. After Robert died in 1329, his loyal companion Sir James Douglas carried the king's heart in a silver casket. Douglas later joined a crusade in Spain against Moorish forces, and during battle, legend says he threw the casket containing Robert's heart toward the enemy. He shouted, "Lead on, brave heart, I'll follow thee." Whether entirely true or not, the story became immortal because it perfectly captured the spirit of Scotland's struggle. That courage could outlive death, that hearts could continue fighting long after bodies had fallen. And still, the story did not end there, because generations later, the memory of Wallace and Bruce would inspire countless others: revolutionaries, patriots, soldiers, people fighting oppression across the world would look to Scotland's story as proof that even the mightiest empire could be resisted. The legend became eternal, and centuries later, Hollywood would introduce the story of Braveheart to millions around the world. The film was not entirely accurate. Many details were changed, some events exaggerated, some characters altered. But despite its flaws, the movie captured something important: the emotion, the pain, the fire, the desperate human longing to live free. And that is why the story still matters today. Because Braveheart is not really about Scotland alone. It is about every person who has ever stood against fear, every person who refused to kneel, every person willing to sacrifice comfort for freedom. That is why William Wallace still inspires people hundreds of years later. Not because he won every battle, not because he became king, but because he proved that one courageous voice can awaken an entire nation. And perhaps the most tragic truth of all is that Wallace never knew if his dream would survive. He died in agony believing Scotland might still lose. He never saw Bannockburn. He never saw independence. He never saw Robert crowned in victory. But maybe that is what makes his story so powerful. He fought anyway. He sacrificed everything without any guarantee of success. And that kind of courage is rare. So when people hear the word Braveheart, they often think of war, battles, swords, blood. But the real meaning is deeper. Braveheart means standing firm when fear tells you to run. It means refusing to surrender your identity. It means believing freedom matters enough to fight for, even when defeat seems certain. And perhaps that is why these stories survive. Because every generation faces its own version of oppression. Sometimes through fear, sometimes through silence, sometimes through people trying to control what others believe. and every generation must decide whether to submit or resist. The men of Scotland made their choice, and because of that choice, the world still remembers them today. So now I ask you, what would you have done if you lived in those times? Would you fight beside Wallace knowing death was almost certain? Would you stand beside Robert the Bruce when all hope seemed lost? Or would fear have forced you to kneel? Because history remembers only two kinds of people, those who obeyed and those who changed the world. If this story moved you, then you already understand why Braveheart remains one of the greatest legends ever told. Comment below with one word: freedom. And if you want more epic cinematic stories like this, subscribe now, because the next story may be even more legendary.